My name is Sarah Callan. I'm 36 years old, and I've spent half my life in military service, first as a reconnaissance cadet, then as a counterintelligence strategist, and later, well, you'll find out. But on the morning of April 17th, standing in the middle of Boot Camp Echo, where sunlight cut through the air like blades, I wasn't a colonel. I wasn't anything. I was just a nameless recruit surrounded by green uniforms, stiff postures, and the pounding cadence of drills. My boots still bore the dust from my transfer. My voice still held the calm that years of classified work couldn't strip from me. And my father, well, he stood above us all on the platform with a whistle around his neck and judgment on his face. He glanced at the roster, paused, saw my name, then loud enough for the entire base to hear, he said, "She's just a failure. Unfit for service." The words cut cleaner than the sun. A ripple of laughter followed. Cadets shifted, exchanged glances. The command instructors didn't even blink. They'd seen hazing before, but not like this. I didn't flinch. I didn't correct him. I didn't need to. Because I didn't come here for redemption. I came here for truth. Later that afternoon, during the final assessment, we were paired off for combat simulation. I was matched with Fisher, a lean, fast-tempered cadet from North Dakota, who had something to prove. He came at me with a blur of elbows and knees, more aggression than control. I let him think he had the upper hand until I didn't. In the last 15 seconds, I pivoted, dropped low, and took him down with a maneuver banned from basic training, but legal in the shadows I'd lived in. He hit the mat with a thud. And that's when it happened. As he fell, his grip snagged the collar of my shirt and yanked it sideways. Gasps broke the silence, because there, inked across my spine, was a tattoo long thought to be ceremonial, and retired the insignia of Unit Kepler 9. Not many knew what it meant, but Commander Halston did. He was passing behind the crowd of cadets, clipboard in hand, expecting nothing. Then he saw the mark, froze, his eyes locked on mine. He took a single step forward, slowly lowered the clipboard, and removed his cap. "We salute her." His voice cracked slightly, every boot snapped to silence. Even the wind paused. My father, who had stood so tall that morning, suddenly looked like he was sinking. Commander Halston stepped up to the platform beside him. "She outranks you," he said, calm, flat, and final. No one moved. No one breathed. And that was the first moment they began to wonder who exactly was I. But for me, it wasn't a moment of pride. It was a moment of exposure. Because that tattoo burned into my skin after a mission that never officially happened, wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Not since the day Kepler 9 was disbanded, dishonored, and wiped off the records. And yet, there it was. Still black. Still defiant. Still mine. They saw the tattoo. They saw Lieutenant General Foster freeze, remove his cap, and salute me in front of the entire base. But what they didn't see was everything that led up to that moment. They didn't see the decades of disdain in my father's eyes, how it was never just disapproval, but something deeper, something personal. My existence reminded him of something he tried to bury, and he hated that I kept digging. They didn't know about Black Line 6, the off-the-books task unit formed in 2012, used for the riskiest covert ops in hostile zones the military would never admit we were in. We were ghosts. We had no names, no records, no medals. And we operated with only one rule: finish the mission, survive if you can. They didn't know that in 2017 I was declared dead in a friendly fire incident on the Pakistan border. The official record said I died saving 3 diplomats. What it didn't say was that the explosion that supposedly killed me had been planted by someone on the inside. And it didn't say that my father was stationed just 11 clicks away that day. No one asked why he never came to claim my body. No one wondered why the report was rushed incomplete and rubber-stamped within 24 hours. No one found it odd that the mission log was accidentally corrupted. But I knew. That mission was supposed to silence me because I'd uncovered what Black Line 6 had truly been repurposed for. It wasn't just covert intel anymore. It had turned into something darker. Interrogation without oversight. Targeted elimination. Disposables. We weren't soldiers anymore. We were tools. And the man who trained me, who taught me everything from infiltration to silent kill strategy, he died on our final mission because he chose to protect me. His death was ruled combat collateral. His tattoo, the one I now wore, was erased from the records just like his name. But I never forgot. They thought I disappeared after 2017. That I couldn't survive without the system. That the failed daughter had finally vanished. But I had spent the last 5 years hiding in plain sight. Civilian disguise, shadow archives, quiet visits to survivors' families, rebuilding the truth, one stolen report, one erased file, one recovered memory at a time. And then I heard the rumors that the old Blackline site had been reactivated, that my father had been assigned as senior instructor at Echo Base, that new recruits were being trained under a new doctrine, one that reeked of the same manipulation, the same systemic rot that killed my unit. I didn't re-enlist to serve. I re-enlisted to expose. So I entered as a recruit, not as a decorated ghost, not as the officer I once was, but as a blank name and a clean file smuggled into the system through a clearance I forged myself. I knew he would see me on the roster. I counted on it. I wanted him to underestimate me, to humiliate me, to let his guard down. Because there's something about military men like him, they never see the storm coming when it wears the same last name. Every exercise, every drill, every moment of dismissal, it all brought me closer to the heart of the operation. I was mapping the new version of Blackline from the inside, identifying every name, every face, every silence that echoed the past. So when Foster saluted me, that wasn't the moment that changed everything. That was the warning shot. Because what they still didn't know was this: I hadn't just survived. I hadn't just returned. I had plans. Plans to dismantle every twisted remnant of the program that stole my team, erased my mentor, and buried me in a file marked honorably deceased. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. And it had already begun. My name wasn't on the door. No rank, no title, no history. Just the label Internal Policy Advisor assigned for observational support. To anyone reading that file, I was bureaucratic clutter, someone the upper brass sent in to improve morale metrics or reassess chain of command protocol. A nuisance, a policy patch. Harmless, exactly what we wanted. Only one man at Echo Base knew who I really was. Lieutenant General Foster. He had served with Falco, the man who trained both me and my father, the man who died in the same explosion that the reports say killed me. But Foster knew that was a lie. He helped cover it, and now he was helping undo it. He met me at the helipad, away from cameras. His face hadn't changed much, still weathered from decades, in the field eyes sharp, but carrying weight in the silence between words. "You'll work from Sector C," he said. "No clearance above Level 3. You'll observe drills, behavior, discipline, nothing else. Keep your head down." "I understand," I replied. "No one can know you're here under false identity. No one can know who trained you. Not yet." I gave him a single nod. Let them think I'm just a ghost of policy. He almost smiled. They already do. The quarters they gave me were in the older wing, dim lighting, stiff sheets walls that whispered old rumors. It suited me. I didn't need comfort. I needed shadows. On my first day, I walked past 10 officers without so much as a second glance. To them, I was just another bureaucrat sent to check boxes. No salute, no questions. Just dismissive nods and half-finished greetings. Perfect. I watched their routines. I memorized names. I learned who played politics, who played soldier, and who played both. And slowly I started finding the cracks. They had resurrected pieces of Blackline, but differently, smarter. Hidden behind training modules labeled as Tier 4 isolation drills. Optional, volunteer-based. But I knew that language. It was how they disguised conditioning exercises, psych pressure, disinformation, tolerance, loyalty, rewiring. And it was being run by someone named Colonel Drescher. The name wasn't familiar, but the methods were. I requested access to training footage under policy review protocol. The request was denied. twice. On the third time, Foster handed me a drive in the mess hall, slid it across the table like it was nothing more than sugar packets. "No trace," he muttered. "You get 1 hour." That night, I locked my door and plugged it in. The footage was grainy, clearly extracted through an internal relay, but what I saw boiled my blood. Recruits blindfolded in confined boxes. Forced isolation. Simulation of betrayal by command structure. One of them broke into tears and begged to be reassigned. The instructor off-screen replied coldly, "If you're not ready to be forgotten, you're not ready to be used." Falco used to say, "We train warriors, not machines." This was something else. This was manipulation as doctrine. I closed the file. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, but I did remember. I remembered the first time I sat in a steel chair, told to forget my name. I remembered Falco slamming his fist on the desk and refusing to allow it. I remembered the difference between training for duty and training for disposal. Someone had blurred that line, and I was going to expose them. The next morning, I filed a benign policy suggestion review inter-unit transfer wait times for long-term trainees. It was a cover, a way to reach those recruits quietly, learn their real stories. Within hours, I received an anonymous message under my door. Policy won't save them. And it won't save you either. They knew I was watching. Good. Because I was just getting started. I saw my father again for the first time in 12 years. He didn't flinch, didn't pause, didn't even look me in the eyes. Just a quick glance, the kind you'd give a malfunctioning printer, followed by a sentence laced with razor blade indifference. "Paper pushers don't last long out here. Don't slow us down." Then he turned to bark orders at a young sergeant as if I wasn't even there. No recognition, no curiosity, no surprise. But I wasn't surprised either. He'd erased me once before. I still remember the morning I was pulled from Obsidian just days before the final phase. No warning, no explanation. The file they handed me had one cold line in black ink, psychologically unfit following combat exposure. It wasn't true. I had passed every evaluation, exceeded every mark. Even Falco himself had said she's the best I've trained in a decade, maybe longer. But that was the problem. Falco chose me, not him. And my father couldn't stand it. He was a veteran, a decorated officer, revered by juniors, feared by enemies, a man of steel reputation. But behind closed doors, he was brittle, especially when it came to legacy. Falco once told me, "Your father wants to be honored. You want to be useful. That's why I chose you." He said it like it was simple. But it wasn't. I didn't just inherit his name, I inherited his shadow. Every step I took reminded him of what he hadn't become. And the day Falco said I would lead the new Black Line generation, my father made a decision. He pulled strings. He falsified reports. He used his rank, his influence, his bitterness, and he cut me. That was the first time he crossed me out. And now, 12 years later, he was about to do it again. But something had changed. This time, I wasn't the one fighting for a place. I had already been chosen by the only commander who mattered. And more than that, I wasn't here to earn approval. I was here to dismantle the lie. I watched him from a distance that day as he strutted across the field with his clipboard and ego. The soldiers stood straighter in his presence. He liked that. He lived for it. But I knew him too well. Every sharp order was compensation. Every harsh criticism was projection. Every time he called a soldier weak, he was trying to bury the image of Falco choosing someone else. I followed protocol, observed quietly, made notes. Then came the afternoon simulation, what they called Loss Protocol Response Drill. It was designed to test how a unit functions after losing its leader. But my father rewrote the script. Instead of focusing on team cohesion, he berated a young lieutenant for hesitating during a decision window. He shouted in front of everyone, tore the man's file in half, and told him he'd never wear command stripes again. All part of the lesson, he said. It wasn't. It was personal. It always was. Later, I filed a silent report. I flagged the behavior, not the man. I didn't want him removed. Not yet. I wanted him visible. I wanted others to start seeing what I had seen all along. That his leadership was performance. That his legacy was paper. That he led by erasing others. That he had cut me out once, and in doing so, had cut his own future short. Because now I was the one with the pen. And this time, he wouldn't survive the edit. They put me in Bravo unit. That's where they dump the ones who can't run a mile without coughing up their lungs or fire a round without closing their eyes. Our gear was outdated. Vests that barely fastened. Comms with static. One rifle came with no firing pin. Another had a warped barrel. They didn't hide the sabotage. They made it feel like a joke. Sergeant Madsen, the training officer assigned to us, never read the drills aloud. He gave vague orders and changed them mid-course, only to later accuse us of disobeying protocol. He pitted us against alpha teams in impossible matchups, combat sim rounds that weren't balanced terrain, that wasn't briefed. Once they sent us into a night operation with one NVG set for 5 soldiers. Madsen said it was a test of adaptability. Fisher laughed. Fisher always laughed. He was the loudest one in the unit. Lean-build hair always wet with sweat. Eyes scanning for trouble he could light on fire. "Hey, Callan," he shouted one morning on the range. "You here to grade us, or do you need us to remind you which way the barrel points?" A few of the others chuckled. I didn't flinch. Falco taught me what to do when someone tries to draw a reaction out of you. Don't waste words. Make them regret asking. I loaded a single round. Adjusted the faulty scope. Took a breath. Fisher kept sneering. Well, still figuring it out, I angled slightly, fired, without raising the stock fully to my shoulder. The shot cracked. The target 100 yards away split through the bullseye clean. The sneer stopped. Even Fisher's smirk tightened, but Madsen didn't say a word. He logged the shot as misfire. They weren't just trying to test me. They were trying to erase me again. The subtle hostility wasn't just from Fisher. It came from the instructors, the evaluation officers, the logistics staff. My paperwork always arrived late. My ammo supply got miscounted every other week. Someone swapped my boots once with a smaller size. It was the kind of sabotage you couldn't report without sounding paranoid. But it was real, death by 1,000 cuts. And still, I said nothing. Because I'd learned that the best way to expose a system isn't to yell about it, it's to survive it. Long enough for it to reveal itself. And something bigger was happening beneath the surface. During chow, I noticed soldiers swapping coded notes, names scribbled into trays of mashed potatoes, strange formations in sugar packets on tables. At night, someone kept slipping out of barracks without triggering the hallway sensors. Someone was running a side op, unauthorized, carefully hidden. And the name that kept surfacing, always whispered, never written, was Falco. They thought I didn't notice. They thought I wasn't built to see the angles, but I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to find what they buried. And the only way to dig it up was to let them think I didn't know how to hold a shovel. That's what Falco meant when he said sometimes silence is your sharpest weapon. So I stayed quiet, took the hits, let them sabotage every test. Let Fisher flap his gums. Let Madsen keep skewing the drills. And when the moment came, when they'd give me live rounds and a blank map, I'd show them just how deeply I remembered every single lesson Falco etched into my bones. But first, I had to endure their noise. Because that's what a ghost does before it returns. It watches. There was a knock at my door, 2 short, 1 long. It was the signal that the logistics reports had arrived. I opened it to find a junior aide holding a folder marked Level 5 Clearance, Internal Candidate Assignment. Wrong delivery, he mumbled. Meant for internal transfer. But it had your name on the list, so I thought. He trailed off. I took the folder anyway. Inside were documents regarding a new advanced training cohort classified off-site autonomous. A revival of the same doctrine that once defined Black Line 6. And there it was, my name. Sarah Callan, nominated for selection, evaluated, approved. But stapled to the back was a note handwritten. Ink pressed hard enough to dent the paper. Denied. Psychologically unfit. Return to sender. Signed Colonel D. Callan, my father. It hit me like a slow, cold wave. So this was the second time. The first had been back when Falco created the final shortlist for Project Obsidian. I'd made the top 3. Somehow my name never appeared on the selection board. No one told me why. Later I found out Falco had approved me, but Command overruled. Someone higher had filed an intervention citing emotional volatility post-deployment. I had spent years believing it was because I broke, that maybe they were right, that maybe I had imagined what Falco saw in me. But now I held the truth in my hands. Twice now. 2 different versions of me, one at 25, one at 33, silenced by the same man. Fisher's voice startled me. You weren't supposed to get that. I turned. He was standing in the hallway, arms crossed, eyes sharper than usual. How long have you been there? Long enough, he said. No grin this time. You're not just some observer, are you? I didn't answer. He didn't push, just nodded slightly and walked away. From that day, his eyes followed me differently. Less mockery, more calculation. He stopped interrupting me during drills. He passed intel faster during tactical sims. Not friendly, but aligned. Something shifted. And I realized Fisher wasn't dumb. Just angry, just misplaced. Like a grenade someone forgot to aim. Maybe he'd seen enough of how the system worked to recognize a pattern. That folder wasn't just a missed opportunity, it was proof. Proof that merit wasn't enough, that blood could be thicker than protocol, but also far more poisonous. That morning, I slipped the folder into the seam under my bunk. I didn't confront my father. Not yet. Because people like him who believe they can rewrite a person's future with a single signature, they don't understand quiet confrontation. They understand exposure, public, irrefutable, and I wasn't ready yet. But I was getting closer. The folder confirmed it. This wasn't just sabotage, it was fear. They feared the ghost of Blackline, feared that if someone like me made it back into the spotlight, the questions would resurface. About why the program ended, why Falco disappeared, why half the team retired under sealed NDAs, and why the one student he believed in most was never allowed to speak. I was done being erased. The next time they tried to bury my file, I'd be the one holding the pen. It was nearly midnight when I saw her, behind the east warehouse between the supply crates and the fence line. Her boots tucked under her arms, wrapped tight. Not from cold, but something else. Megan Nguyen. Young. Sharp. A top performer in the previous marksmanship trials. Falco would have liked her straight shooter, observant, quiet, but not timid. And yet she was crying. I didn't announce myself, just stood there a moment. The shadows cloaked us both. When she finally noticed me, she didn't flinch. I know I'm not supposed to be here, she said, voice brittle. I'll leave in a minute. I shook my head. I'm not here to report you. That's all it took. The silence broke. I passed the tactical simulation. I know I did, she whispered. Every move, every objective. I led my team right. I followed every protocol. She wiped at her eyes, but they still marked me failed. I waited. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded paper. It was damp but legible, her copy of the scenario scorecard. A mark in red ink across the top: fail, leadership breach. They said I gave an order that compromised team safety, but I didn't. I followed their rules exactly. I asked, did you question it? She looked down. I did more than that. And then a confession, not rehearsed, not defensive. Just raw. I filed a report against Sergeant Levin. During night ops last week, I saw him altering results for one of the boys, Jason Pike. He swapped the comm logs and erased the error codes. I logged it officially with internal review. Her hands trembled. Next thing I know, I'm pulled from the list. 2 days later, they say I failed. That's when I understood. It wasn't just about a score or a grudge. This was retaliation dressed in procedure. I opened my notebook. The same one Foster told me to keep under lock, separate from the digital systems. Paper didn't vanish like files did. It didn't corrupt or misroute. She watched me write. "Why are you helping?" she asked, not bitter, just bewildered. I didn't answer her directly. Instead, I wrote her name, the date, the training unit, the accusation, and then my own signature beneath it. I looked up. If anyone asked, this conversation didn't happen. But if they come for you again, hand them this page. Megan stared at me for a long time, then nodded once. As she left, I leaned against the cold metal of the crate. A quiet fury simmered low in my spine. Foster had told me once years ago after a hearing gone wrong, "You don't need 100 testimonies. You just need one truth told by the right voice." Megan's voice was quiet, but it would echo, because I'd make sure of it. The next day she returned to class. No one spoke of the test, but I saw the shift. Her posture straightened, her silence firmer, more deliberate. Pike, the boy who benefited from Levin's manipulation, watched her nervously now. Levin avoided her altogether. Something was moving beneath the surface, and just like that, a crack formed in the facade. I didn't need to storm the gates, just light one match at the foundation. And Megan unknowingly had just handed me the flame. It happened on a Thursday. Late afternoon. Sky overcast, wind heavy. The kind of day where secrets didn't want to stay buried. I was sitting on the far end of the weapons maintenance lot, going through the same checklist I'd done 100 times. Recoil springs, trigger groups, stock damage. That's when Fisher approached. No swagger, no smirk. Just a printed sheet of paper folded twice, creased in a way that said he'd been holding it for hours, maybe longer. He didn't speak at first, just stood there. I looked up, waiting for another half jab, another challenge, another mockery of the paperwork soldier they all thought I was. But his face was different. He handed me the page. "I wasn't supposed to see this," he said. I unfolded it, slowly, as if my hands already knew what it was before my eyes confirmed it. It was an internal operations log, a backup file from a classified vault. Nothing fancy, just plain black ink on department letterhead misaligned from a low-budget print queue. But what it said everything. Subject: Callan Sarah. Unit: Ghost Echo. Operation Blackline 6. Status: presumed KEA. Date: October 3, 2017. There was more. Lines of redacted text, coordinates. A note from a Joint Command officer recommending a closed memorial, no public record. I had seen this once before years ago. Just once. And then I watched it vanish. Fisher had found the ghost of a file meant to disappear. I folded the sheet and slid it into my jacket. "You could get discharged for accessing that," I said quietly. He shrugged. "You know how many nights I spent wondering why you walked like you'd been in real fire, but flinched when people shouted your name? Or why Foster never corrected you no matter how far you pushed the edge?" He paused. "I thought you were pretending, acting like you were above us." His voice softened. "But you weren't pretending. You've been somewhere we can't even imagine." There was a silence between us. Then he added, "You're not just an observer. You're the only one in this damn place who already passed the test they're trying to fail us on." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I let my fingers drift across the faded ink. A memory printed. My own name flanked by death. Presumed KIO. That's what they called it. I remembered the way my blood had soaked the sand that night. The weight of the man I dragged on my back, both of us limping through gunfire. The blackout order. The radio silence. The moment Falco's voice cracked over comms, not from fear, but from helpless rage. And then the stillness. The agreement. The fake obituary. They buried me without ever seeing a body. All to protect the program, to shield the truth behind Blackline 6. I looked up at Fisher. His expression was steady now. Not of awe, but of realization. He hadn't just discovered I was once part of something classified. He had seen the full arc, who I'd been, what I'd endured, and what had been done to erase it. "You're not going to report this," I said. He shook his head. "I should," he answered. "But if I do, someone else will make it disappear for real this time." Then quieter. "You've survived too much to vanish again." He turned to leave but stopped after a few steps. "I don't think you came here just to observe us," he said. "You're here to finish something." I met his eyes. I'm here, I said, because someone crossed a line years ago. And this place, this base, is where it began. That night, I didn't sleep. I reviewed the file line by line, committing every phrase to memory. Fisher's action had changed everything. He wasn't just another trainee anymore. He was now a liability or an ally. Maybe both. Either way, we were no longer strangers on opposite sides of a classroom. We were survivors of a truth too sharp to forget. And by handing me that file, he hadn't just crossed the line. He'd chosen to stand on the other side of it with me. I didn't sleep that night. The printout Fisher gave me sat on the desk in my quarters, lit by the flicker of a dying lamp. My name. My death. The file I was never meant to see again. Falco once told me there are two kinds of truth, the kind that frees you and the kind that binds the people who tried to erase it. This one did both. At 0400 hours, I slid the document into a standard brown folder, wrote nothing on the tab. No annotations, no markings, just the original paper, still warm from being in my hands too long. I walked to the administrative wing in silence. The lights were dim. The hallway smelled of floor wax and old paper. I didn't knock when I opened the door to my father's office. He wasn't there. That part I expected. I placed the folder at the center of his desk. Then I pulled a pen from my jacket and scribbled one sentence on a torn page from my field log. This time, do you want to sign it yourself? I placed the note on top of the folder, angled so it would be the first thing he saw. And I left. No confrontation, no warning. Just the truth returned to the man who tried to bury it. The next morning, I reported for the usual observational run-through on live terrain maneuvers. Nothing had changed on the surface. Same cold glances. Same clipped instructions. But when my father entered the command tent, he didn't look at me. He looked through me, like I was a mirror he didn't want to face. There was something trembling beneath his skin. Not fear, not regret. Something deeper, older. The weight of a man who had been caught looking into the eyes of the past and realizing it never stopped watching. That evening, I returned to my quarters and found nothing unusual. No response, no message. It was 2 days before I heard anything. Foster called me in. He didn't sit, didn't smile. He said he read it. I nodded. He didn't deny it. Foster continued, but he hasn't admitted anything either. He's stalling. I stared at the wall behind him, the framed photo of the original Obsidian team. Falco stood dead center. My father 2 steps behind him. And me, absent. Always absent. I'm not here to make him confess, I said. I'm here to see if he'll finally finish the lie he started. Foster crossed his arms. You know he won't. Maybe not, I replied. But now he has to wake up every day and choose silence. That's different than hiding behind it. On the 5th day, during a closed debrief session with the training staff, my father walked in unannounced. He held the folder in his hand. The same folder. The note still tucked under the flap. He looked around the room, then placed it on the central table. He didn't say anything, just left it there, then walked out. The room went quiet. One of the junior instructors reached for the folder. Foster stopped him. Not yours to open, he said. Not yet. Later, I returned to my quarters. I opened my locker where I kept a second copy of the same file, Fisher's original. I didn't need it anymore. He had it now. And in the silence that followed his silent delivery, the burden shifted. He could destroy it. He could deny it. But he could no longer pretend it didn't exist. I had given the story back to its author. Whether he chose to end it truthfully or burn it again, that was no longer my concern. I had planted the weight in his hands. Let him finish it himself. The graduation grounds were cold that morning, though the sun had risen clear. The recruits stood in formation boots, lined with precision on gravel that still remembered the storms of nights past. I stood in the last row, no insignia, no ribbons, no name tag. Just a shadow at the edge of a ceremony I was never meant to be a part of. They handed out commendations. Unit leaders stepped forward. Fisher received his with a barely concealed glance in my direction. Megan's name was called, and I felt something loosen in my chest as she crossed the field with dignity, more than they ever allowed her to have before. Then my father took the stage. He stood behind the podium like he had 1,000 times. Voice steady, shoulders locked. The perfect image of command. He began, "There's one file I was handed but had no words to write upon it. No rank to assign. No commendation to present. It's too empty to recognize. Too vague to justify." He didn't say my name. He didn't need to. Everyone knew. The air tightened around me. Recruits turned slightly, just enough to glance my way before snapping back into position. I have no remarks about Advisor Callan. There is nothing in her record I can speak to, and so I won't. He stepped down. That was it. No honor, no acknowledgement, not even a dismissal. Just silence. But before anyone could move, before the ceremony could end, another figure walked out. Lieutenant General Foster. His pace was slow, measured, intentional. He didn't speak as he crossed the platform. He didn't stop where speakers usually stood. He walked straight past the microphone, past the flags to the table of training records, and placed a red file at the center. Its spine cracked from age, the emblem faded but still unmistakable, the obsidian crest split in half down the middle. A dozen heads turned, instructors, officers, recruits, my father. Foster didn't look at anyone but me. Then, with a voice low but steady, he said, "There was once a unit that didn't officially exist. Its members had no birth dates, no death notices, no graves, only outcomes. It was called Ghost Echo. Their final mission was Black Line 6. He rested his hand on the red file. Their commander was listed as presumed dead in 2017, but some of us never believed that. The silence shifted. It became sharper, electrified. I saw my father step forward, but Foster raised a hand, not in protest, but in command. The same gesture we were trained to obey without hesitation. Her name is Sarah Callan. She led 6 operatives into a mission no one else would touch. They never came back. But she did. Broken, unseen, erased by the very hands that trained her. He paused. And she returned not to reclaim what was taken, but to protect what was left. He opened the red file. There on the top page was my photo in full tactical gear. Below it, status presumed dead. Mission debrief suppressed by order 1973B. Classification Ghost Echo Command. Foster turned toward the assembled group. You were told she was an observer, that her file was empty, but the truth was never lost. It was hidden. He looked back at me. And now it no longer is. Then he did something I never expected. He saluted, not out of pity, not as ceremony, but with the precision of someone who knew exactly what that gesture cost. And slowly, one by one, others followed. First Megan, then Fisher, then the instructor who'd tried to fail her, then the recruit who once laughed at my lack of insignia. And finally, though it took him longer than it should have, my father. He didn't say a word, but his hand rose to his brow, a quiet, reluctant, bitter salute. And for the first time in 12 years, I saw his eyes not as my father, but as a man who finally realized the legacy he tried to erase, now stood taller than him. When the ceremony concluded, no announcement was made, no applause followed. But the silence that remained was no longer the same. It was not the silence of omission. It was the silence of acknowledgement, the kind that speaks louder than words. The silence still hung in the air when Foster turned toward my father. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words cut clean and sharp like something long overdue. You know that tattoo, he said. We both used to dream of earning it, but only one of us was ever chosen by Falco. My father's jaw tightened. Foster took a slow step toward the edge of the platform, then turned to face the recruits. His voice carried with purpose, now not for confrontation, but for clarity. She survived Black Line 6, he said. the last living operative, the final commander of Ghost Echo, and the only person who has the authority to shut this entire training program down. There was a beat, a long breath across the ranks, and then Foster turned to me. "Sarah Callan," he said loud enough for every officer, every recruit, every ghost in that field to hear. "You now outrank everyone on this ground." I stood still. Every instinct in me said, "Stay quiet, stay low, don't break formation." But Foster raised his hand in salute. Not to the past, not to protocol, to me. And then they followed. One by one the officers stood. The instructors, the trainees, even the ones who once ignored me, mocked me, sabotaged my tests. They rose, their right hands lifted. Uniforms stiff with dust and sweat, but posture sharp because this wasn't ceremony anymore. It was truth. I looked at Megan. Her face was calm, solid. At Fisher, whose eyes held none of the sarcasm from before. Only fire, respect, and something else, conviction. Even the assistant commandants who had tried to block Megan's score now saluted. All except one. My father still stood near the edge of the platform, frozen. Foster turned back toward him. "She outranks you," he repeated. "This isn't a matter of pride, Callan. This is structure, recognition, and consequence." My father didn't respond. Didn't move. His hands clenched but not into fists. Into something smaller, tighter, as if gripping an old belief that had finally cracked. I took one step forward, just one. For the first time, I looked directly at him. And I said clearly, "You taught me the importance of hierarchy, of respecting chain of command. So now as your superior officer, stand down." He didn't meet my eyes, didn't speak. His gaze fell to the ground. He looked down, and that somehow said more than any argument ever could. It wasn't anger in his silence. It was the absence of resistance, the hollow admission of defeat. Because even if he couldn't accept who I'd become, he couldn't deny it anymore. The field remained still. No one moved, until Foster walked toward the center table toward the file that had exposed it all, and with both hands closed the red folder. Then gently he turned to me and said, "Do what you came here to do." I walked to the podium. My boots echoed against the concrete. Not heavy, just real. I stood where he had stood, where they had all spoken before me. And for the first time I spoke not as a shadow, not as a forgotten advisor, but as the final bearer of Falco's legacy. This program, I said, was meant to build leaders, not crush them. It was designed to challenge, not to destroy. And those who turned it into a battlefield of favoritism, sabotage, and fear will no longer define its name. I looked toward the recruits, the ones who had trained through broken gear fake tests, rewired expectations, and still stood tall. You deserve better than what was handed to you. Then I turned to the senior officers. The Obsidian program as it stands is hereby dissolved under direct authority from Command Blackline. Effective immediately. Gasps rippled. But no one stopped me. They couldn't. Foster nodded once. "This ground will be cleared," I continued. "What comes next will not be built on silence, but on merit." I stepped down. No applause, no music. Just wind moving across the open field like a whisper carrying something old away. As I walked past my father, he didn't reach out, didn't speak. But just before I passed him completely, I heard him breathe something so low it was barely there. I should have seen it. I didn't turn back, not out of spite, but because I finally didn't need his recognition to stand. The next morning, the wind shifted. Not just the weather, it was something in the air, in the rhythm of boots against gravel, in the way recruits whispered. Softer, looked longer, saluted cleaner. The training grounds weren't loud anymore. They were alert. Megan's name was the first to echo across the hallway. Her score had been restored. Quietly, but officially. The review board reversed the technical fail that had once haunted her record. She didn't smile when they told her. She simply nodded as if her spirit already knew the truth, long before they dared admit it. She walked past me in the mess hall, paused, and then she did something I wasn't expecting. She reached out and touched the back of my hand just briefly. "Thank you," she said. Not for saving her, but for proving she wasn't crazy. Fisher was next. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't pack with fanfare. But when I passed by the barracks that afternoon, his cot was stripped, his locker clean. Word spread he'd been reassigned. Elite division. Shadow ops somewhere off-grid, but permanent. He left one thing behind, a note folded into his bunk slats. I unfolded it later. 7 words. "You never needed to prove it anyway." I placed it inside the back cover of my black notebook, the same one where I'd written Megan's testimony, where I had scribbled things I wasn't allowed to say aloud. By sunset, the names on the bulletin board had been reordered, not alphabetically, by merit. No more recommended labels pinned by favoritism. No more silent redirections by unseen hands. Everything had shifted, except for one office. My father's. It had remained locked all morning. Lights off, blinds drawn. No movement inside, but just before midnight, I walked past it again, and the door was ajar. The desk was empty, no photos, no stacks of files, no signature pen. Only a manila envelope addressed to me in precise handwriting. It was the first time he'd used my name without a title. Just Sarah. Inside was a single black and white photograph, worn edges, faded grain. 2 young men in standard cadet uniform, my father and Falco, standing on a concrete platform. Falco's hand rested on my father's shoulder. Neither of them smiled. They both looked like they believed they'd live forever. On the back, scrawled in tight ink, were 10 words. He chose the wrong man back then. But not now. I sat down. Not in his chair. Just on the edge of the windowsill. And I stared at the picture. The weight of it wasn't nostalgia. It was history finally returning home. He had resigned without fanfare. No speeches. No apologies. But this was his way of saying what he never could with a salute. He had seen me. He had accepted the truth, even if it cost him everything he thought he stood for. Outside, the barracks lights dimmed one by one. Someone in the training yard was still running drills. I could hear the rhythm boots against dirt, steady, precise. Someone was still trying, still believing, still training the right way. I stood and turned off the office light, left the photo where I found it, and stepped back into the night. The whispers would continue. The apologies would come slowly, but that was fine. I didn't need acknowledgement anymore, just the truth. And room for others to finally step forward. I took nothing from the training camp when I left. No insignia, no patch, no ceremonial pin. Only my notebook and one scroll of paper carefully rolled and sealed handed to me in the early morning by General Foster. His voice was low, final. Operation Obsidian is now officially concluded. The last operative has fulfilled her charge. I didn't open it then. I didn't need to. Because I already knew what it meant. Obsidian wasn't a program anymore. It was a memory. A fracture line that had split careers, buried names, and stolen choices. It had taken nearly everything from me. But it had also carved out something no rank could give clarity. I wasn't going back. Not to the army. Not to the divisions that once made medals matter more than morality. Not to the same cycles of gatekeeping wrapped in protocol. No, I walked in the opposite direction. But not away. Never away. Because I hadn't lost the mission. I had only changed its form. Instead of a base, I found a battered warehouse near the coast, abandoned, quiet, anonymous. No badges were required to enter. No one saluted at the door. Inside, I built something different. It wasn't a training center, not exactly. It was a place for those who had been unseen. Those who had been overlooked, underestimated, passed over because their names weren't paired with the right legacy. Women who had been called too soft. Men who had been told they didn't fit the culture. Immigrants whose accents were mocked. Veterans discharged with silence instead of honor. Every week they came. Not many. Sometimes only one. sometimes 5. But I trained them like Falco trained me. No commands, just questions. No ego, just edge. Do you know how to shoot when your eyes are closed? Can you still hit center when you don't hear the applause? Will you run into fire when no one sees you do it? Most of them didn't understand the first few sessions. That was fine. Eventually they did. And then they taught others. One night, as I closed up for the day, I noticed the scroll Foster had given me was still tucked in the bottom of my bag. It had been weeks. I finally unrolled it. Inside was a formal closure statement. Signatures from 6 senior officers, a final declassification of Obsidian stamped with a broken seal, the same crest Falco once wore beneath his vest. At the bottom, written by hand in dark ink, you weren't trained to lead. You became a leader by surviving. No title, no sincerely. But I recognized the handwriting. It was Foster's. I sat in the silence for a long while, remembering every hallway I wasn't invited into, every folder that never reached my hands, every instructor who looked through me like I was a ghost. And then I remembered the one shot, the one Falco made me take. Eyes closed, no command, no audience, just the target. I folded the scroll carefully, not out of reverence, but out of respect. Then I placed it at the very back of my notebook behind everything else. Behind Megan's words, behind Fisher's letter, behind the name that once marked me presumed dead. And I wrote one last entry. The end of Obsidian is not the end of those it shaped. That night I stepped outside the training hall. There was no flag above the door, no anthem played, only wind and the slow sound of footsteps. Someone new arriving early, probably nervous. I smiled, because I knew exactly where to begin. And I knew they'd never have to ask for permission to be seen. I didn't tell this story because I wanted to be saluted. I told it because I know what it's like to be erased, to watch your name disappear from a list, to be passed over in silence, to have your truth buried deeper than your failure. And if you're reading this, if you've ever been told you're not enough, not ready, not worthy, I want you to know something very simple and very true. You're not alone. I was crossed off by those who were supposed to protect me. I was doubted by those who said they knew me. But I never crossed off my own name. And that's what mattered. Because sometimes recognition doesn't come as applause. It comes as stillness. It comes as the moment when someone who once looked past you finally looks up and sees you, the real you, not the one in uniform, not the one in shadow, not the one they imagined, but the one who stayed, the one who endured, the one who rose. That's the you I speak to today. This isn't a message for soldiers. It's not a message for those with medals or ranks. It's a message for anyone who's ever had to stand up without being asked. For anyone who's ever had to prove they belonged in a place that never welcomed them. For anyone who walked through fire quietly and came out holding not a trophy, but the truth. You are not broken. You are not invisible. And your silence is not your failure. It is your record. Your quiet record of every time you did the right thing when no one noticed. Of every time you spoke up and were ignored. Of every time you stayed when walking away would have been easier. You don't need their signature. You don't need their permission. Because the only document that matters is the one you write every day in your actions, your choices, your refusal to vanish. So if you ever wonder who you are the one who stayed. You are the one who still shows up. You are the one who was meant to be here even if no one invited you. That is your clearance. That is your legacy. And maybe that is your command. Before we say goodbye, I want to ask something simple. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning, your coffee warm in your hands? Or is it late, one of those nights when stories like this feel like company? Wherever you are, I see you. I may never know your name, but I know your story. Because you've lived it. And if this story touched you, if it stirred something forgotten or reminded you of who you've always been, I hope you'll consider joining us, not just to hear more stories like mine, but to be part of something softer, something braver, A community that still believes in the quiet ones, the steady ones, the ones who don't shout but still show up. Subscribe if you'd like to stay, or simply leave a comment. Tell us where you are. We read every single one. Because behind every story is someone like you. And in case no one told you lately, you're not too late. You're not too far behind. And you're not forgotten. You are still here. And that is everything. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your heart. Carry this story with you, and when the day comes that someone tries to erase you again, write your name back in ink, in stillness, in truth. Because you never needed permission, only a reminder. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, walk on.